Hey guys, welcome to another Dig In. Glad you're here. We are in Ephesians 2:11 through 22. Why don't we get right into it? What do you think, Jim?
Well, thanks, Matt. I actually really like a couple of the verses that really stuck out to me. The first one being verses 11 and 12, where he's really talking about, being sort of in the Gentile community and really not being sort of part of God's people, God's kingdom. And so the author talks a little bit about, in verse 12, remember that at that time you were separate from Christ, excluded from citizenship in Israel. I think we can all kind of feel that way, like thinking of myself specifically, I always felt that way until I became a Christian. And, it just kind of stuck to me. It kind of resonated with me. And then just going on to verse 19, it talks a little bit about, consequently, you are no longer foreigners and strangers, but fellow citizens with God's people, and also members of his household. So really through Christ, it breaks down sort of that wall that we might feel, whether it's, an actual wall or a spiritual wall. And, just through Christ, we're able to come into God's kingdom and feel like, we're part of that and safe in the knowledge that, we're really one of his children.
Yeah, I really think that's a key portion of this section. If you were to look at verse 14, it says, "For he himself is our peace, who has made the two one and has destroyed the barrier, that's the dividing wall of hostility." And historical context, back in Jewish time, there was a temple that existed, and there was this courtyard that was allowable for Gentiles to enter. But there was this barrier, this line, this section where it was very clearly laid out that Gentiles could not go into, only Jews could go into. And I think God's plan was always for the people of Israel, who were God's chosen people, to come into communion with him, and that through the nation of Israel, Jesus Christ came. They brought this made this available to the world. But the Jewish people, they kind of became proud in this title, like God's chosen people, and they created these rules and protocols and stuff. And the Gentiles, which the Ephesians church, which Paul is writing to, was largely Gentile. They were mostly Gentile, not Jews. And they were excluded from communion with God. God at one time, lived and dwelled within the inner part of the temple. And part of that was by design. God created the Jewish people as his chosen people. But it was so that they could bring the good news to the world. And the Jews, they just kind of excluded them. So these Gentiles would have really felt that. They would have felt and remembered the exclusion that they felt. But now in Christ, Christ dwells in them. They are, and you and I are, the temple. And we are no longer excluded from communion with God. So this is just another proof that Paul is laying out that Jesus Christ is powerful. And the power that he shows, last week the power was his power over life and death, that you get to move from death to life. And this week it's showing, I think, that you have he has power over to turn hostility into peace, to turn division into peace.
Yeah, I like how you describe that, and it's it sort of having the historical background, you can kind of understand why Paul wrote it the way he did, right? I think folks living in that time would just feel that, and I think we probably feel that today. Folks that live in today's age, who are maybe not of faith, of Christian faith, or maybe they are, but they've somehow sort of drifted off the path. They may feel that barrier still there, and have forgotten the teaching that through Christ you really can't get off the path, right? Like, you're still there. It's just a matter of sort of rededicating yourself, and you don't have to, be completely separate from God.
Yeah, and I think there's that aspect where there's people who have gone off the path, who are not closely communing with God. There's, in our country specifically, a lot of people think that you can be a good Christian and not go to church, which you can be a Christian and not go to church, and you can probably be a good Christian, but God's design, the Bible actually tells us that God's design for bringing the gospel is through the church. So if we want the power of Christ, it's in the church. Like, I hear sometimes people like, who aren't coming to church, who are like, I really wish God would do this in my life. Like I feel isolated and lonely. Well, come to church. Or I feel like I'm not challenged spiritually. Well, come to church, and these people around you will challenge you.
Yeah.
But I think there's also a message for those of us who come to church every single day, or every single week, or are regularly in the church. And I think that there's a few things. One, the church, a healthy church is one that's looking outside of themselves. A healthy church is not inward focused, it's outward focused, and is welcoming and looking for ways to show Christ's love to the world, right? So you think that's a healthy church, guys? I do. Yeah. How about you, Jim?
2 thumbs up.
Okay. So healthy church is that. But a healthy Christian is also someone who has those same ideas, someone who is actively reaching out. And I think these Jewish people had gotten it wrong, and I think we have a tendency to do the same thing, to get it wrong, where we become inward focused rather than outward focused. And I think if you guys were to look out into groups that you are in, whether it's a friendship group, whether it's a sports team, whatever it is, are you inclusive or exclusive? Do you go to church and you don't really want to invite other people because you've got your group of friends and you're not really interested? And I think that's a challenge for us. A healthy Christian life is connected to a healthy church and is an active part in the Bible, in the body. Really, to start this section is interesting because the very first thing says, therefore. What have we talked about in the past few weeks? Therefore means we need to look back. So I look back to verse 10, and it says, for we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works. So we're created to do good works. Therefore, remember that you were formerly Gentiles by birth, and called the uncircumcised. So that's what Jewish people called them, because they weren't circumcised. And they were separated from Christ. So he's saying, you're created to do good works. Therefore, remember that you were once separated, so that you can look out at the people who are separated and have a different thought about them. We're divided, right? As a country, we're divided politically. As a country, we're divided spiritually. Like, even within our church, we've got different denominations that sometimes, unfortunately, are not unified as a whole church. One denomination might believe something and then look down at another denomination who doesn't see it the same way. When in reality, I think we're supposed to be a part of the body, be able to agree to disagree in some instances, and show love towards each other. Because when it comes right down to it, we are unified not by our political affiliations, not by our social affiliations, not by our wealth affiliations, whether we're rich or we're poor, but we're affiliated because Christ's saving power. So a healthy church, I think, is a church that has diversity, whether it be ethnic diversity, whether it be socioeconomic diversity, whether it be like sinner and not, saved and unsaved. I mean, we're all sinners, but saved and unsaved diversity. There should be diversity within the church, because that shows a healthy church, one that's growing, one that's showing care for their neighbors and loving their neighbors.
Yeah, I mean, if you didn't have that level of diversity, then you wouldn't necessarily be showing God's love, right? Because
Right.
if you're showing God's love, then you're not worried about the differences that separate, say, you from me. You're more focused on the things that unite us, which, you know,
Right.
is our love for God, right?
Yeah.
In our relationship with God. So, yeah, I mean, you think about folks that are somewhat disconnected, and I think I was kind of thinking as you were speaking about, somebody who says that they love God and that, but they feel disconnected, but they're also not spending time in the Bible, right? Like they're not
Yeah.
reading, they're not having that relationship. Like, even a spiritual relationship needs to be fostered and nurtured, and we all stumble from time to time, right? We all hang out with certain people, and then all of a sudden you don't see them or talk to them for a couple weeks, but then you come back. I think God's relationship with us is very similar. But
Yeah.
it still needs to be nurtured. You still need to be able to look back and even if you feel disconnected, know that you can still go back and be connected,
Yeah.
um,
And I
without
think that's
without really much
partly,
effort.
sometimes we put that on ourselves, but also, again, partly like maybe not every church is doing this well. And I'm not going to
Yeah,
point churches out, but I know it's true.
yeah,
And maybe the church, maybe you don't feel welcome because the church isn't welcoming and not really grasping onto this aspect. So I think the challenge for us is both sides of it. One, if you are separated from Christ based off of decisions you've made or whatever, know that Christ will take you, that he loves you, he'll take you back. But if you are in the church, you need to realize that about other people, that
mhm,
that they're not going to be able to work through whatever situation they've gone through if you're not going to welcome them back in and not necessarily be supportive of their decisions, but be supportive of them.
yep.
So that's really all I got, unless Jim, you have anything else?
No, I can't think of any jokes at your expense, so I feel good.
Hey, you better be careful what you're saying. I had this out just in case Kelly came up because I told him I was recording. So if he came up, I was ready to be like, nope. All right. So
He
we
knows who
are
not to mess
in,
with.
yeah, we're in Ephesians 2, 11 through 22. And if you guys read that through this week, and I look forward to seeing you on Sunday and talking about what your thoughts are. So you guys have a nice night.